2 weeks ago, we considered the story of Joseph, who was the second to the youngest of the 12 sons of Jacob, or Israel. Remember who they were? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, little Joe, and Benjamin. And I got a Rice Krispie treat for that when I was a little kid and memorized all that. Joseph being the second to the youngest and the first of Jacob's children to Rachel, was kind of a daddy's boy, though. And he had a knack for telling his brothers about these dreams that he had where they all bowed down to him. Now, the brothers got tired of Joseph and his dreams. And so you know what they did? They plotted to kill him. Imagine that. The oldest brother, though, thank goodness, Reuben came along and said, we should not have this blood on our hands. We shouldn't kill him. I don't know whether it was more of a dad's going to get mad at us if that happens. But Reuben came up with the idea that, okay, let's just throw him in a pit and maybe the wild animals can take care of him. Now, the scripture said later on that really what he wanted to do was set him up so where he could go rescue him. But before that could happen, Judah came up with even better idea. He said, you know what we could do? We could sell him into slavery and make a few dollars. And that's what they did. Not exactly the apex of merciful deeds, but hey, they didn't kill him, right? And the point of this story, families are complicated. Can I get a witness? This week, we get to jump ahead a few chapters and quite a few years into the future as far as the story is concerned. Let me give you a little quick overview of what happened between the time Joseph was in the pit and sold to the slave traders and the time we got here to the story that Cameron was reading. Joseph made it to Egypt, and he found favor with the Egyptian leaders, particularly a leader named Potiphar, who was the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. And unlike Joseph's brothers, the Egyptians loved his dreams. They were fascinated by these prophetic dreams that Joseph had and shared with them. In fact, the Pharaoh made Joseph a leader in Egypt, and he gave him a new name. You want to know what that name was? Zaphenath-Paneah. Yet another name Mary rejected when we were considering names for our boys. One of you could have been named Zaphenath-Paneah. Mary objected. Well, meanwhile, back in Israel's home, in Canaan, this devastating famine broke out. And so Israel sent all of his sons, except for his new little favorite son, Benjamin, over into Egypt to negotiate for some grain. But when they got there, this crazy governor, Zaphenath-Paneah, had them detained. And the brothers didn't know why they were being treated so harshly. Now, of course, they didn't realize that this governor was their little brother Joseph. And so while the brothers were detained, they started fighting among themselves. And even years after the incident happened, they believed that their imprisonment was karma kicking them in the butt for what they did to their little brother Joseph. And so eventually, Joseph let them out of jail and sent them back to Canaan. And he told them that there was going to be no negotiations for grain at all unless they brought Benjamin back with them. They had to bring themselves and Benjamin back to Egypt if there was going to be any negotiation for grain. And because the famine was so widespread and because it had happened for so long and because they were so desperate, they went back to Canaan, got Benjamin, and brought him back to Egypt. And so to make a long story short, right before this story right here that Cameron read, Benjamin was just about ready to be made a personal slave to Joseph. But then Judah raised his hand and pleaded for his release. That's when Zephanath-Paneah revealed himself to be their long-lost brother Joseph. And you would think that Joseph would be mad at them. You would think that he would say, "Ha ha! I finally have you all where I want you. I can get back at you for selling me into slavery all those years ago. My revenge is now complete." But he didn't. And a lot of people wouldn't have faulted him if he did, though. But Joseph didn't get all vengeful with his brothers. In fact, the text says he wept loudly, so that the rulers of Egypt heard. Because the only thing he wanted to know was if his father, Jacob, was alive and well. So the brothers were sort of dumbstruck, because they thought for sure their goose was cooked. They were in the most vulnerable position that they could be in. They were at the mercy of this brother whom they had maliciously wronged so many years before. But you know what? Joseph was not mad at them. In fact, he said, "Listen, guys, don't beat yourself up over this situation. Because the way I see it, it wasn't you who sent me to Egypt. It was God. And it's because I'm in Egypt now that I can help you through this famine. It was all part of a bigger picture. God has called me to preserve our family. And now that I'm a leader in Egypt, I can make this happen. So take these wagons, take these provisions, go back to Canaan and bring our father back here so that you can be safe and so that we can once again be together as a family." Now, can you imagine the emotional impact of this encounter? Because you've got 11 brothers who must have been terrified out of their minds that Joseph would have them, hauling bricks to make pyramids or something worse. They were sure that Joseph would do something to get even with them, but he didn't. And believe me, it took a long time for them to get their heads wrapped around it too. Because if you read ahead into the 50th chapter, after their father Jacob died, the author of the story wrote, realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong we did to him?" Valid question. But Joseph still loved his brothers and kept them under his protection. And how do you suppose Joseph felt? Do you think that there were nights when Joseph was awake at night, reliving the trauma of being thrown into the pit and being sold to strangers? Well, maybe. But he seemed far more focused on the fact that he was in a perfect position to help his family. If anything, it seems like Joseph's biggest worry was whether his father was still alive and well. And so he showed mercy on his brothers. Now, I don't know whether this mercy came easy or not, but I am sure that it was genuine. It seems so genuine when you read it here in the scriptures. And so the brothers, they went back to Israel to tell their father that his son was still alive, and then brought Israel back to Egypt, where the family was able to be together again. A happy ending to the book of Genesis here. Mind you, things got a little hairy for the people of Israel later on when Israel died and a new Pharaoh came in and put the people into slavery, but that's a story for another day. This week's story is about grace, it's about mercy, it's about forgiveness, and it's about reconciliation. Because even after his brothers did such a horrible thing to him, Joseph was willing to not only forgive them, but help them too. Now, how many people here today can honestly say, I'd forgive my brother or sister for plotting to kill me? Or, I'd forgive my brother or sister if they tried to sell me into slavery for a little bit of silver. Some people they have a hard time forgiving a sibling for borrowing a car without asking, let alone forgiving somebody for plotting to kill them. See, some families are torn apart by what others on the outside may see as minor misunderstandings or trivial differences in perspective. Jealousy certainly plays a big role in a lot of family feuds. I've done enough funerals and seen enough families in distress and that are broken over things that just pile up over the years. Like I said last week, families are complicated. It doesn't matter whether they're biological families, step families, adopted families, blended families, foster families, or, guess what? Church families. Relationships are complex. Relationships are fragile. Relationships take a lot of hard work to maintain. It doesn't take much to rock them. It doesn't take much to wound them. And sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't take a whole lot to completely break them and destroy them either. But as we see in our text this week, it is possible to mend even the most broken families, even the most broken relationships. It is possible to forgive even in the most dysfunctional families. Because forgiveness and reconciliation can take place even when the circumstances are extreme. But what it takes, though, is empathy. Empathy and a willingness to see God in each other and in any given situation. Now, I'm afraid in this day and age, empathy is not really there much. At least I don't see a whole lot of it. It's very hard to come by. It seems like we don't listen to each other much anymore. It seems that we are incapable of putting ourselves in the shoes of another, even for a moment. Rather than making the effort to fully understand a problem that we might face, we latch onto a solution that we think is infallible, and we cling to that solution rather than dealing with the problem. Because we see it everywhere in the world of politics, in the world of race relationships, global conflict, science, economics, religion, anything that requires that we look at something from different angles. Because in some circles, compromise and collaboration are considered signs of weakness. You either agree or you disagree. And if you don't agree, then it's our job to fix you. And believe me, there are a lot of folks in this world trying to fix each other right now. And I'm afraid that we are especially guilty of this in the church. See, we don't have to agree with each other. That is a part of our disciples' ethos, isn't it? We say we agree to differ, we resolve to love, we unite to serve. It's one of our core values. We know we're not going to agree with each other because true community isn't achieved when we all agree with each other. True community happens when we are in empathy with each other. Empathy is hard to come by when we are so busy running around trying to fix each other. See, in my experience, most of the people who want to fix me are themselves broken. and aren't always sure what they want to do with their own lives. And so why they think they can sort out someone else's life is a complete mystery to me. And I suppose it's always easier to fix someone else, I guess. But faith communities, they have difficulty with people, especially people in crisis. We don't know what to do with people in crisis. And it's funny that most 12-step recovery groups have a better way of dealing with brokenness than a lot of our faith communities do. And this is probably because most 12-step programs are built around the idea that we all have hurts and hang-ups and habits and issues, that we're all trying to manage them. And, we want to manage them together. Our temptation in the church is to be like Job's friends in the book of Job, the ones who came to him during the worst crisis in his life, during the time where he was absolutely broken, and tried to fix him. We want to say, we have all the answers. See, we have this little Bible verse here, or we have this little scientific fact here, or here's my philosophical wisdom. Let me fix you. But what if we just stop trying to fix each other in our faith communities, in our churches? What if we just begin with the affirmation that we are all primally broken? The best faith communities are the ones where brokenness is acknowledged, heck, maybe even celebrated. But the trick to helping each other is not to get lost in our brokenness, not to get overwhelmed by it. See, I think that Joseph recognized the brokenness in his brothers. And I think that the brothers recognized in themselves their own brokenness. And who knows, maybe even Joseph thought, wow, I sure could see why my brothers would want to sell me into slavery, because I could be kind of a jerk sometimes when I tell them about those dreams. But rather than getting lost in their brokenness, this family came together and recognized God's hand in the whole thing. They were able to let all their anger and all their jealousy and all their resentment away, to just get rid of it and to bring in forgiveness and mercy and grace. They knew that this forgiveness and mercy and grace could open up all sorts of opportunities for healing and health and wellness. And so as we wrap up today, I'd like you to think about some of your relationships now. What are the marks and the features of your relationships in your life right now? Are they marked with anger, resentment, jealousy, impatience, grudges held from past misdeeds and mistakes, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, brokenness? Maybe you think this brokenness is irreparable, that it can't be healed. Now, I don't want to throw something out there as trite as, well, if Jacob and his brothers can work through their brokenness, then you should too. Because I recognize that this story may seem to represent the exception rather than the norm, especially in light of all the brokenness that we see in the world today. But I do want to point out that the high point in this story was when Joseph recognized the hand of God at work in this whole situation. Because it's when he was able to crawl out of the pit of anger and hurt that he was able to reconcile with his family. And you know what? God is in the business of reconciliation. I'll say that again. God is in the business of reconciliation. God is in the business of healing broken relationships. And we experience this most clearly when we come to this table of grace and mercy and reconciliation each week, together as a family of God. Would you pray with me?